The way you communicate is costing you in your career, more than you might think. Right now, you're either looking up the corporate ladder and wondering how will you ever command a room like those people you look up to? Or you've already made it to the top, you are the CEO, but you know that you're not coming across as powerfully as you should be. There's a gap between your job title and the impact you could be making. I watched it happen last month. A young CEO I coach at a multi-billion-dollar company was standing in front of a few hundred people at a town hall. His delivery was full of filler words, he was unconvincing out the gate, and in those very first few sentences, the room lost a bit of confidence. And we are drawn to people who can project a calm authority in times of uncertainty. So here's what I want you to understand, because it's the whole reason this video exists. He isn't less intelligent than the people who sound better than him. He wasn't even less confident. The guy is a proper industry heavyweight, but he was less convincing. He was less charismatic. He was less clear than he should have been in that moment. And clarity is a trainable skill. Why is this so important? Because clarity of speech conveys clarity of thought. And there's something nobody tells you about how top CEOs speak. It isn't a natural gift. It's not charisma. It is a set of techniques, frameworks, and mechanics that get drilled into people at that level, usually in private, usually expensively, and almost never explained on the internet. Today, I'm going to give you 5 techniques of the very best. Real ways that you can sound like the top 1% of CEOs. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a 6th one, which isn't really a technique at all. But it is a bonus extra. It's an uncomfortable truth about why these people sound 3 months ahead or even 3 years ahead of you. It's a powerful realization and reframe that I came to, one that might help you realize why you're not where you want to be, but you could be. Let's go. Tip number 1, prep your answer. 2 people, same company, same board meeting, same question from the chairman. Are we going to hit our number? The first one says, so it's a really interesting question. Obviously, there are a lot of moving parts here. If you look at Q2, we had some headwinds in the Asia business and there's been some softness in the pipeline. Although I'd say the underlying fundamentals are still reasonably solid. And I think depending on how a couple of deals land, we should be in a decent position. Now, are we going to hit our number or not? You don't know, the board doesn't know, I don't know either. The second person says, instead, yes, we'll hit our number, and our forecasts indicate we'll hit it with about a month to spare. The reason is 2 of the 3 deals we flagged in April have now closed. The Singapore mandate signed on Tuesday. So we're in a good position, and I'd actually like to talk about what we do with the upside. 15 seconds, same information, completely different person, completely different perception. Now, in terms of the framework, what did the second person do? That has a name. It's called PREP, PREP. And it's taught to actual presidents, heads of state, chief execs all over the world every single day. It's point, reason, example, point. Your point is your answer, not your context, not your caveats, not your throat clearing or warming up. It's your answer in one sentence, nice and punchy. Yes, we'll hit it. We'll hit our number. Your reason is the because. 4 reasons, 1 reason. The moment you give 4 reasons, you tell the room you don't actually know which one matters. E is the example. The example is your proof. Something concrete, something specific. The Singapore mandate signed on Tuesday. And a date and a name does more work than a whole paragraph of assurance. And then P, finally your point again. All good speakers return home. It's the same idea, but in different words. Because the thing you say last is the thing they walk out with. That's it. PREP. 4 beats, less than 60 seconds, and you can run it in a lift, in a board meeting, in a corridor, or an interview. Here's why the first person's answer failed. And it wasn't because it was long. It's because they made the room do the work. When you lead with context, you're asking your listener to hold 6 pieces of information in their working memory and assemble the conclusion themselves. Some of them will. Most of them will half do it, arrive at the wrong answer, and quietly downgrade their confidence level in you. But when you lead with the answer, everything after it becomes evidence. So it's the same words, but different order. And the order is the name of the game. There's a really interesting status dimension here as well, that senior people feel, but rarely name. So here's the difference. Junior people talk to demonstrate they've done the work. Senior people talk to save the room time. The length of your answer is a signal about who you think the meeting is for. The biggest and most obvious differentiator between junior managers and seasoned executives is that juniors have a tendency to ramble. They get lost in the tiny details and they over-explain. You will recognize this pattern in yourself or others. The real meta skill here is compression. how can you compress as much meaning as possible into as few words as possible? Because let's face it, nobody has ever said to themselves, I wish that presentation was longer, even if it was fantastic. It was fantastic because it was precise and because it packed a punch. So here's what you want to aim for. Be great, be brief, get out. Your absence is part of what makes your presence stronger. It is part of the charisma and gravitas of a CEO. Say what needs to be said, say it with passion, say it with conviction, and then move on to solving the next challenge in your business. Brevity is not the absence of effort. Brevity is where the effort went. Every rambling answer you've ever heard was an answer that hadn't been thought through yet. The rewriting and the mental revision is the work. And either you do that heavy lifting in advance, like a real leader does, or you get lazy. It's verbal diarrhea. Your audience now has to do the heavy lifting of figuring out which bits are actually important. There's a great line attributed to Harry Truman. He said, if you can't convince them, confuse them. The joke is, most people do this by accident. They're not being strategic. They're just thinking out loud, hoping the room mistakes volume and complexity for substance. So what can you do right now? The before is your speech is littered with filler words. You ramble, you dance around the point. You hope that by speaking for longer, you'll eventually say something worthwhile. The after looks like you speaking with executive structure. The point. We should move the launch to September. Reason. One clear reason, the API isn't stable. Shipping it in its current state will cost us more than the delay does. Example. You remember our competitor rushed the launch of their new model last year? It was full of bugs, they scrambled to fix it, and the media killed them for it. So my point is, my recommendation is, let's push the launch by 1 month. Better we do it right than do it twice. Done. So your action is for the next week, just get in the habit of organizing your answers through the lens of PREP. Practice answering in that way so you embed the structure in your brain. And the more you model it, the more natural it will become. Tip number 2, stories beat spreadsheets. Imagine 2 CFOs at the same all-hands meeting, both presenting the same result. Customer churn is down 4%. The first CFO puts up a slide. It's a good slide. It's a bar chart, quarter on quarter, 4% improvement, green arrow. He says, churn is down 4%, quarter on quarter, driven by improvements in onboarding and a reduction in first 90-day attrition. It's correct, it's accurate. Also, nobody will remember this by lunchtime. The second CFO doesn't even put a slide up at all. Instead, she says, back in January, a customer called Stephanie phoned our support line to cancel her subscription. She'd been with us for 14 months. The agent who picked up the phone, Dennis, down in Manila, asked her one question that isn't on the script. He asked her what she'd been trying to do on the day she gave up. She told him. He fixed it in 4 minutes. Now she's still with us. And in February, we put Dennis's question into the script for everyone. That's most of the 4% you're about to see on this slide. And now she puts the slide up. Same 4%, but now the number has a person attached to it. It has a mechanism, a name, a story, and everyone in that room knows exactly what behavior they're supposed to repeat. The Greek philosopher Aristotle got here before us, about 2,500 years ago, to be precise. He said there are 3 ways to persuade a human being. Logos, which is logic, ethos, which is credibility, and pathos, which is emotion. Now, senior leaders in very analytical industries, finance, consulting, engineering, law, most of the people I work with, are trained to almost exclusively use logos. But human beings aren't always logical. They are psychological, and they make emotional decisions all the time. Logic is what makes people agree with you. Pathos is what makes people act. And those are 2 very different jobs. It's what founders and entrepreneurs often get wrong too. They think that a pitch deck is a vehicle for the delivery of facts, when it should be a vehicle for the delivery of emotion. So, how do you actually build one of these in 90 seconds, on your feet, without turning your quarterly update into a TED Talk? I use a simple formula called SHUSH. Every single day, I watch smart and otherwise successful people struggle to communicate their value. They have the expertise, but they're not brilliant speakers. And they lack the technique, they lack the gravitas to deliver their ideas with impact. They don't know how to speak in a way that makes people listen. The good news is that the principles and techniques of effective public speaking can be taught, they can be learned. And the truth is most working professionals, many senior executives, are probably operating at 7 out of 10. in terms of their communication potential. You are talented, you are hardworking, you're good at what you do. But if you're honest, you know deep down that you're leaving money and opportunities on the table every time you're asked to present to an audience. Click the link or visit my website and submit an inquiry. Let's unlock the confident communicator you were always meant to be. Stakes, suspense, surprising truth, humor. So stakes. What's at risk? Immediately. A customer called to cancel. We're in. Something is on the line. The suspense is a gap the listener needs to close. He asked a one question that isn't on the script. You now want to know what that question was. That wanting is the entire mechanism. That suspense lives there. Third S, surprising truth. The payoff has to be counterintuitive or it isn't worth the runway. And the surprising truth in this story is that the fix took 4 minutes. 14 months of revenue nearly disappeared over 4 minutes of friction. Last of all, humor. If you can do it, fantastic. And it's the one that people skip. It doesn't mean a joke. It means one moment of lightness that tells the room they're allowed to breathe. And often it's just a little aside, a casual aside. You know, we've been in 3 strategy offsites about customer churn last year. Dennis solved it on a Tuesday afternoon for free. So this is the part I find genuinely remarkable. And it's the reason companies should stop treating storytelling as a soft skill. There's a body of research in psychology called narrative transportation. The finding from Green and Brock, and a lot of people after them, is that when someone becomes absorbed in a story, they stop counter-arguing. Not because they've been fooled, but because the part of the mind that generates objections is busy following the plot. So if you give someone a bulleted list of claims, they audit it line by line. If you give them a story, they travel it with you. But the bit of research into communication I find most incredible is this phenomenon of neural coupling. So Yuri Hasson's lab at Princeton University, they hooked people up to brain scanners and then had them listen to someone telling a story. And what they found is that the listener's brain activity starts to mirror the speaker's. The same regions light up in the same sequence with a short lag. And in the very strongest cases, the lag disappears and actually then reverses. The listener's brain begins to anticipate the speakers. They're a beat ahead of the words. So when the story is good enough, the audience is actually running your thoughts slightly before you say them. So you know when people say, "She is speaking my language"? This is the very real science behind great communication and behind great storytelling. You're quite literally on the same frequency and the same wavelength. Now, you cannot do that with a bar chart. A chart transmits information, a great story synchronizes two nervous systems. Those are not the same. And if your job involves getting 1,000 people to move in one direction, only one of them is going to work. What a good story does is create a road from the voice to the heart that does not go through the intellect. Now, you're not going around the intellect to bypass it. The numbers still have to be right, but you're making them feel something that you can then back up with data. And if you can make them feel differently, you stand half a chance that they might do differently. So your before is churn is down 4%, driven by onboarding improvements. And after, it's 90 seconds on Stephanie and Dennis. Then the slide. So here's your action. Take the single most important data point in your next presentation. One number. Find the one human being on the other end of that number and write 4 lines. What was at stake, where the struggle or suspense was, what the surprising truth is, and one line that lets the room breathe. 90 seconds out loud before you touch the deck. Tip number 3, the downward close. This one is different from the other ones because it isn't about what you say. You can fix every word in the last 2 tips and still walk out of the room having lost it because of what your voice did in the last half second of your sentences. Listen to these 2 same words side by side. We're moving the launch to September. We're moving the launch to September. The first one is a question wearing the clothes of a statement. It's asking the room for permission, and the room will give you an answer because you asked. The second one is an instruction. Nobody replies to it because it wasn't a question, it was a statement. Upward inflection at the end of a sentence signals that the sentence isn't finished, that you're checking, you're seeking, you're inviting. And that's not a flaw, by the way. It is enormously useful when you want to project warmth, when you're building rapport, when you genuinely want input in the room. But downward inflection signals completion, certainty. This is settled. The failure for senior people isn't that they use one or the other, it's that they use upward inflection by default, everywhere, including the 4 or 5 sentences in the meeting that actually needed to land as decisions. This maps onto something I use constantly in coaching. which is warmth versus competence, or rather warmth and competence, because every room reads you on both axes simultaneously. Warmth answers the question, is this person for me? Competence answers, can this person be trusted to get it done? And a great CEO needs both, because competence without warmth is cold and gets undermined. Warmth without competence reads as pleasant and irrelevant. Inflection is one of the fastest and quickest dials you have on that. Up for warmth, down for authority. And the actual skill is not picking one, it's knowing which one of your sentences is doing which job. So the practical version would be run it nice and warm through your setup, through your questions, through your acknowledgements, and then take it down hard on the decision, the ask, and the last line. The pause. The other half of this equation is silence, which almost nobody uses on purpose. Watch what a 2-second pause does before a decision. We looked at 3 options, and the one we're going with is the one nobody in this room liked back in March. The pause made the effect, not the words. And amateurs feel silence because silence feels like failure when you're standing up there. But you're the only person in the room experiencing that pause as long. To everyone else, it just registers as control. And just like music is made by the silence between the notes, where you choose to insert a pause, where you choose to take a beat, can completely transform the significance of what you've said. Silence is the loudest thing you own, and it's free. Cicero, the Greek philosopher, said, "Nothing convinces like conviction." And conviction isn't about volume, it's not about certainty, about the future. Half the time you genuinely don't know. But conviction is the sound of a person who has decided, the sound of someone who believes. And the sound of deciding is a sentence that goes down at the end. So the before, every sentence lifts at the end, the room hears a submissive person asking to be agreed with, just like that. The after, warmth in the setup, downward on the decision, and the final line. So what can you do? Your action is to watch your recordings of your past meetings, your town halls, panel appearances. Listen to it with your eyes shut. Just be really attentive to your intonation. How many sentences went up at the end that shouldn't have? Then pick 3 important sentences for your next meeting and take those down. 2 or 3, that's enough to change how you're perceived and how you're read. Tip number 4, the power of metaphor and 1 image beating 10 adjectives. 3 of the most famous pieces of communication in the USA over the last century. Number 1, Martin Luther King didn't say, "I have a detailed policy position on civil rights legislation." He said, "I have a dream." And Obama didn't say, "Our campaign has demonstrated the viability of a coalition-based approach to lifting our GDP." He said, "Yes, we can." Steve Jobs didn't stand up and say, "This device has 5 gigabytes of flash storage." He said, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then he reached into his jeans and pulled out the iPod. Same information in every pair, but one version you'd forget in a meeting, and the other you've remembered for 20 years without even trying. So here's the framework, here's the version that's actually usable for you, because you are not giving a speech on the White House lawn, you're presenting a transformation program to 200 people who are tired. You need 1 image, singular, for the one thing you are asking them to do. Not a theme, not a brand, 1 concrete, physical, seeable thing that carries the big idea you need to survive the meeting. If you're asking a team to stop spreading themselves thin, for example, don't say, "We need to prioritize ruthlessly and focus our resources on the highest impact initiatives." Boring. Say, "Right now, we're pushing on 10 doors with 1 finger each. From Monday, I want us pushing on 1 door with both hands." That is a line that will get repeated amongst colleagues within a day. And that's the actual test of a good image, a good metaphor. Does it lodge and stick in the mind? Can the audience carry it out of the room? And here's where senior people often ruin it. I see this all the time. They find a good metaphor, they find one, and it works. So what do? They add a second one, then a third one. And by the end of the paragraph, we've been on a journey, we're building a plane while flying it, and we're also moving the goalposts, and we need to board the ocean. Every metaphor you add costs you the previous one. So 1 image held for the whole talk beats 5 images sprinkled across it every single time. You also need to speak with rhythm. The other thing all 3 of those examples share is that they're built with good structure underneath them. Martin Luther King repeats the same opening phrase, "I have a dream, I have a dream," over and over, and the repetition itself becomes the argument. That's called anaphora, and it is the oldest trick in the book because it is the best one. 3 beats land better than 2, better than 4. It's why we say blood, sweat, and tears, not blood, sweat, tears, and effort. Something in us hears 3 as complete. And short sentences after long ones create emphasis for free. You can write a long, winding, subordinate clause heavy sentence that carries a lot of complexity and detail and nuance. Then stop. That's it. That's the technique. Break up the rhythm. Now, you don't need to sound like a preacher, but if the most important line in your talk is the same length, the same shape as every other line, it will not stand out. It will not land, no matter how true it might be. So before, you might say, we need to prioritize ruthlessly and focus on the highest impact initiatives. Afterwards, you might say 10 doors with one finger each, or one door with both hands. That's the metaphor. So your action is to write the one thing you're asking for in your next talk as a single sentence. Brainstorm. Write down 10 metaphors or similes. It's like this. 9 of your ideas will be terrible. 1 will be gold. Keep it, use it, then resist the temptation to dilute it with 5 other metaphors. Tip 5. The separation is in the preparation. There is this myth at senior level that preparing too much makes you sound scripted, and that the really impressive people are the ones who can just walk in, wing it, do it. Mark Twain has the simple answer to that one. He said, "It usually takes me more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech." Everyone you've ever watched be brilliantly spontaneous was running material. Not a script, material. Just like the great stand-up comedians spend years crafting a single joke, they don't have a verbatim script on stage, but there is a ton of invisible work they don't let the audience see. So I would suggest you script 2 things, and 2 things only: your opening words and your closing words. Script those verbatim. For the middle, you can leave a bit of room for improvisation and serendipity. Simply write down your keywords, your bullet points, use those as triggers for you to remember. Here's why this is important. And this is Daniel Kahneman's work on how memory actually operates. It's called the peak end rule. When people evaluate an experience after the fact, they do not average it. What they remember is the most intense moment, and they remember the end. That's it. Those 2 data points become the whole memory, which means the 11 minutes in the middle of your presentation are, in memory terms, doing comparatively little. And the 90 seconds at the start and the 30 seconds at the end are doing all of it. Most people prepare in exactly the opposite proportion. They spend 6 hours on the middle, the slides, the appendix, the backup data, and then they wing the opening because they'll just introduce it. And they end on, so yeah, that's about it. Any questions? You just threw away the 2 moments that constitute the entire memory of your talk. I tell my clients constantly, you have to finish with a bang. Do not finish with a whimper. The other thing to prepare, which nobody does, is your transitions, your segues. If you listen to someone on stage and you think, bloody hell, they're articulate, I bet good money it isn't their vocabulary alone. It's that their ideas connect. The joins are smooth. So that's the cost side. But cost was never the reason we started this. That's a nice segue. It closes one idea, signals a turn, and opens the next one in 11 words. Inarticulate sounding people have great ideas separated by, so yeah, moving on to the next slide. Spend good time crafting your segues and your transition sentences before you get in the room. Another underappreciated aspect of preparation that comes before any of the words is asking yourself, what does this room need to hear? What does this specific room need to hear, as opposed to what I want to say? What's in it for them? Peter Drucker said, the most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. It's reading between the lines. Before that town hall that I mentioned at the top of this video, the actual question in that room was, am I going to lose my job? Nobody asked it out loud, but that's what was on everyone's lips. And he answered a different question for the next 10 or 11 minutes, which is not a delivery problem, that's a preparation problem. And no amount of vocal technique fixes it. One more tip, because over-preparation has a failure mode too, and it's called being polished into irrelevance. There's this finding from Elliot Aronson in the 1960s called the Pratfall effect. The Pratfall effect is competent people, like high-profile CEOs, actually become more likable after a small visible blunder, like spilling a coffee, losing your place, admitting you got something wrong slightly last quarter. But this is the part that matters for you specifically. It only works if competence has already been established. For someone the room isn't sure about yet, a stumble is just a stumble. But for someone accomplished, for someone senior, it's humanizing, which means this is a tool available to you precisely because of where you sit. You've already got the competence. The minor blunder buys you a bit of warmth. That's why the small, self-deprecating aside from a CEO lands so well, but the same line from a new graduate doesn't. So the before is you spending 6 hours on the deck with the opening completely improvised and the closing is, yep, that's about it. Any questions? After, I want you to memorize that 90-second opening. Set the stakes, be engaging, be interactive, get a lighter beat, but a humor if possible. And your 30-second close is memorized. I want your smooth segues written down. The middle can be improvised from solid material with keywords and bullet points as mental triggers. So for your action, next presentation of any size, write your last line first. Begin at the end, before you've done your slides. Write the sentence you want to be the last thing anyone hears, then build backwards from there. What do you want them to feel when the talk is over? It'll take you 20 minutes, but it's the highest return 20 minutes in the whole process. Point number 6, the bonus one, the 6th one. This isn't a technique, and you can't practice it this week. You've watched the CEO speak on a panel, on an earnings call, in an offsite, and you've had the thought, how are they so smooth with it? How do they know that? How are they already 3 moves ahead on something I only heard about last month? And underneath that thought, there's usually another one, which is, they must be smarter than me. I've spent decades now in rooms with those people, and I want to tell you what I've actually found, because it's both less flattering and much more useful. Wisdom is often just access in disguise. They don't sound 3 months ahead because they think faster. They sound 3 months ahead because they are 3 months ahead. They heard it in a room that you weren't in. A founder told them over dinner. A regulator mentioned something off the record. Their board member sits on 2 other boards and brought that pattern with them. What you're hearing as insight is very often just proximity, delivered with good mechanics. And I want to be careful here because this could sound like an excuse, and it absolutely is not. Here's why it's the opposite. If their fluency were natural talent and they were born with it, there'd be nothing you could do. You either have it or you don't. And you'd be right to feel that gap is permanent. But if it's access, access is a decision. It's not comfortable, it's not fast, but it is a thing you can change. Which rooms you're in, which dinners you say yes to, whose 10 questions you're on the receiving end of every single week. Naval Ravikant says, play long-term games with long-term people. And that's this. Compounding doesn't only happen with money, compounding happens in relationships too. And it happens to your communication as well. There's this idea sometimes called the 5 chimps theory. You might have heard it. You can predict a chimpanzee's behavior from the 5 it spends most time with. It's a bit of an aphorism, not a study, but you already know that it's kind of true because you can feel the difference in how you think and how you speak after spending a week with sharper people. So here's the uncomfortable part, and the one I'd perhaps sit with. If the rooms you're in this year are the same rooms you were in last year, your thinking isn't moving either. It's not progressing. Not because you're not working hard, you probably are, but you're recirculating the same inputs at increasing speed and perhaps mistaking that for progress. The 5 things in this video can and will make you clearer. They'll make you sound more senior, and they work. I've watched them work on people at the very top of their game, at the very top organizations. But mechanics only ever transmit. They do not generate, they don't create. And what you have to say still has to come from somewhere. And being intentional about putting yourself in more novel situations, exposing yourself to more sources of inspiration, and being a part of more influential conversations is another way that you can find an edge. One of my absolute favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, who said, "People will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Everything in this video is in service of that idea. The PREP, the SHUSH storytelling, the tonality and inflection, metaphor, preparation, none of it is about sounding impressive. Sounding impressive is what people do when they've mistaken the meeting for a performance. This is about clarity. It's about being clear enough that the person in front of you can actually feel what you meant. So I'd leave you with a question rather than a summary. It's not, how do I sound like a CEO? The question is, what's the one big idea I've been trying to say all year that still hasn't landed? Because it's probably not that they didn't listen. It's more likely that you haven't done the work to make it clear what they should be feeling. I hope this video was valuable to you. And if it was, I'd appreciate it if you took 2 seconds to hit like and subscribe. If this is the first time you've come across my channel, why don't you check out my origin story video, or you can tune into one of the many conversations I've had with inspiring CEOs and entrepreneurs from all over the planet on my podcast, Playing the Inner Game. Thank you.